There's a great power in knowledge, in knowing the way, in realizing the answers, or at least some of the answers to the puzzle of what it is to be human, or the spiritual journey. And knowledge is very alluring, knowing. And it's almost as though there's a bridge between knowing, the deep inner knowing, and the living of, as knowing filters into the deeper aspects of the inner body, or the inner life, or the inner beingness. Knowledge is very alluring and magnetic and satisfying on a certain level. But knowledge is not embodiment. Knowledge is not becoming. And here's the edge. Here's the thing. Here's the rub. Is knowledge is not transformation. Transformation is becoming what knowledge points to. What knowledge is, we must become. And that's where knowledge starts to reverberate on the inner world, starts to shake up all of the habitual old patterns, all of the tight aspects of us, where it becomes a lived reality, not a known, even conceptual reality. And there's nothing ostensibly wrong, of course, with knowledge. Knowledge can lead to becoming. In fact, on a certain level, maybe it must do. But becoming, and this is where it resonates deeply in the architecture of the organism and the emotional life. And for some, the becoming, for some, the knowing can be almost easier, depending on the life that has been lived, depending on the conditioning that has happened, depending on the karma, depending on the wounding, depending on the stories that are carried in the individuation, in the body, in the energetic body, not in the body itself. But that's where it's at. That's where we have to make our bed, to see that knowledge must become us. Whatever it is that touches us, whatever it is that pulls us, whatever it is that calls us. The real journey begins when we allow that to inform how we are living, how we are being, how we are becoming. Is this knowledge? Is this knowing? Is this reading? Is this spiritual information? Is this wisdom filtering into the very fabric of our lives? For to have true transformation in us, it must filter into every aspect of our lives, into every relationship, into our doingness, into how we are in our interactions as we go about the world, in our judgments, in our projections, in our thoughts, in our reactivity. It has to filter like a light or like water. The information, the knowledge has to filter into every fabric, every aspect of our lived life. And that's where it gets difficult for people, because the habitual patterns are so entrenched in us. that we have become them and they have become us. And so there's a kind of stuck into it, stuckness, glued into our conditioning, glued into our identity as the habitual patterns that dominate us and run our lives secretly or quietly or in the background or even visibly. As we start to see them, we start to see consciously. And so there it is, the knowing, the knowledge must filter into those areas and break up those stuck patterns. And so this is a constant pointer of this channel to point to the becoming, not just the knowing. There's no real ultimate value in just knowing. If I were to say, I don't know what, I know I am one with all beings, with all things, with the universe, and yet I that doesn't manifest itself into my lived experience, and I live as though I'm a separate, fearful, tight, reactive entity. Well, then there's a schism between the knowing and the living. I know I'm one, and I act as two. And that's not a forced place. That's where the dance is. The dance is in between the knowing and the becoming. The true dance, the dance of embodiment, is in the spaceless space between what we know, what we discover, what we intuit, what we read, what we learn, and what we are. That's where the dance is, and to learn that that's where the dance is, without being punitive, without being self-attacking, but to be ultimately extremely self-forgiving, and to actually, at least while the dance is happening, enjoy the dance. You love the dance between knowing and becoming, or knowing and being, or knowledge and embodiment. Embodiment is where the juice really is, but the knowing, the knowledge, is tantalizing and briefly satisfying. But the brief satisfaction is actually not the true taste, not the true fulfillment. And we do seek fulfillment, and that fulfillment can only really happen when the knowledge, the knowing, fully informs the whole of the life. So it becomes a lived knowing, not a place, not a grand place that I'm finally, established in, but an ongoing living of the embodiment of knowing. And that makes, it sort of brings you into a more harmonic, because it stops being just a mental idea, a mental experience, a mental knowing, and actually comes into being a very lived experience as the river of life. No longer looking at the river, saying, well, that's beautiful and I love that river. Like by and by, through the dance that I'm talking about, you become the river. And the river flows, and sometimes it has roughness, and sometimes it is smooth and beautiful, but always it's the river of becoming. And so this is, perhaps an insight into the difference, which is why the knowing or the finding out or the discovery or the information or the knowledge is ultimately dissatisfying, because it's only really ever pointing us to the lived experience, to the lived becoming, where there's a deeper satisfaction, a deeper soul knowing, a deeper rest in that knowing, a relaxation into the becoming as an ongoing path, as an ongoing journey, as an ongoing river. So I hope that's spoken to you. Bless you.